Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation on the former Czechoslovakia as well as Romania, Moldova, and Bulgaria. My name is William Cooper. I'm the proud grandson of Frida Cooper, who is an Amica resident that passed away on July 7th of last year. I miss her, but I'm making my monthly presentations at Amica in her honor. We're continuing our travels to Afro-Eurasia, which covers 57% of the world's land area, but has 86% of its population. We began in the Middle East, then went to Southern Asia, then Southeast Asia, then Central Asia, then East Asia, then North Asia, and our beginning of Eastern Europe, then Eastern Europe, and today we continue our travels to Eastern Europe with the former Czechoslovakia, Romania, Moldova, and Bulgaria. Bon voyage. And next month we will complete our visit to Eastern Europe with the former Yugoslavia and Albania. I hope to see you on the 22nd of June. Let's get started. So there are a few key points that we should understand before beginning the presentation. So firstly, Czechoslovakia didn't exist before World War I, and it was part of different empires, along with the now countries of Czechia and Slovakia. There were 6 major causes of World War I, which we'll discuss today, and the treaties signed after World War I established and reset countries. Over the next 75 years, wars and struggles led to countries like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia breaking apart. The USSR started in 1922, and over the next 70 years, it controlled 15 countries, and Czechoslovakia, Romania, Moldova, and Bulgaria were part of the Soviet-created Warsaw Pact. And the unwinding of the Soviet Union led to the independence of the 15 countries that they controlled. There are 3 other things that we must understand before we visit the countries. Firstly, we have the 2 world wars, including their causes. Secondly, the subsequent collapse of world empires with their treaties entered. And finally, the creation and collapse of communism. So let's begin with World War I's impact on Europe. 70 million personnel participated in this war, 8.5 million combatants, and 13 million civilians died. There were 6 main causes, which we'll discuss today. So the first one was European expansionism, because at the time imperialism was on the rise, and the acquisition of colonies through exploitation led to the increased resentment of major European powers. Secondly, we have Serbian nationalism, which was a cause going back to the mid-late 1800s, as Slavic Serbs wanted independence from the Austro-Hungarian and the Ottoman empires. And ever since 1878, they had tried to gain control of Bosnia to form a unified Serbian state. And third, we have the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, which is the cause that we talk about the most, but it's not the only one. So in 1914, he was assassinated by a 19-year-old Serb, and Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia that was rejected. So they declared war on Serbia with German support. Russia came to Serbia's defense, initiating World War I and enlarging it from a small problem in the Balkans to a geopolitical disaster. And fourth, we have conflicts over alliances, as because of interlocking treaties, the war enlarged into a great war. And these treaties triggered resulted in the formation of the Allied and the Central Powers. The next 2 are the reasons why historians say that Germany was to be blamed for the escalation and the continuation of World War I. This resulted in extreme reparation payments, as well as land and military equipment taken away with restrictions. So we have what was called the blank check assurance, which were the conspired plans of Austria-Hungary and Germany. So in July of 1914, after Franz Ferdinand had been assassinated, Germany told Austria that they would give them unconditional support if they ever went to war with Serbia. And this therefore gave Austro-Hungarian leaders the confidence needed to embark on a war against Serbia, which is why a lot of people say that Germany was responsible for the entirety of the war. And finally, we have German millenarianism, which was often called the spirit of 1914, as during the war, the German population was incredibly supportive of the war, and the German government believed that the war and its support of Austria-Hungary was a way to secure its place as a leading power, because at the time its power was diminishing, as countries like the UK and France were on the rise. And this was again supported by public nationalism. There were also the Balkan countries involved. But before we talk about that, what exactly are the Balkan countries? So they're usually described as a region of southeastern Europe, and the main countries are Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Moldova, Serbia, and Slovenia. However, portions of Greece and Turkey are often included, as Greece is fully European and Turkey has Istanbul, which is 3% in Europe. And the Balkan Wars, which involved many of these countries, were a precursor to World War I. So let's watch this video about them.
In the 19th century, the Ottomans faced numerous nationalist movements. In the Balkans, the Greeks were the first to gain their independence in 1832. Over the following decades, Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro were granted full independence, the Bulgarians were rewarded with their own principality, and the Austro-Hungarians occupied Bosnia. Wars between Bulgaria and Serbia and the Ottomans in Greece encouraged the nations to strengthen their armies. Yet, the nationalist rebellions within the Ottoman Empire continued. Then, in 1908, the Young Turk Revolution restored the constitution to the Ottoman Empire. However, the resulting chaos allowed the Bulgarians to finally proclaim their full independence and, under Tsar Ferdinand, develop a large army. The Austrians also fully annexed Bosnia, putting an end to the Serbian hopes of expanding north. Then, Albanian uprisings threatened Serbian expansion south. These Albanian uprisings corresponded with the Italian invasion of Libya in 1911, a war which demonstrated that the great powers had no intention to preserve the Ottoman Empire and showed the Ottomans were weak. Now the Balkan nations saw they could win and take over the Ottoman territories they desired. So the Serbians signed an alliance with the Bulgarians, promising them southern Macedonia after the war. Greece, fearing they'd be left out of the territorial games, soon made alliances in mid-1912, and finally Montenegro, just a minor power, entered into these alliances and the Balkan League was formed. The nations began to mobilize and Montenegro declared war on the Ottomans in early October 1912. They were joined by their allies on the 17th of October, just before the Italians made peace with the Ottomans. The Greek strong navy prevented Ottoman reinforcements from arriving in Europe, and this allowed the Balkan allies to make quick gains. In just over a month, the Bulgarians had advanced south to the Aegean Sea and also laid siege to Adrianople. The Serbians pushed south into Albania, Montenegrins expanded west, and the Greeks moved north and took Salonika. Also, in late November, the Albanians in Vlora declared their independence. The Bulgarians tried to take Constantinople, however their assault was repulsed, so, along with Serbia and Montenegro, they signed an armistice with the Turks in early December and peace talks began. However, Adrianople remained under siege and the Greeks continued fighting in northern Epirus. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, the Committee of Union and Progress, led by Enver Pasha, feared Adrianople would be given to Bulgaria, so staged a coup in January 1913. And this brought Bulgaria, Serbia and Montenegro back into the conflict. The Bulgarians fought off an Ottoman counterattack, and then in March, Ioannina fell to the Greeks and the Bulgarians took Adrianople. The Ottomans were finally forced to make peace at the Conference of London, which was overseen by the great powers. The Turks' European territory was divided, but a lot of disputes emerged. Firstly, Albania was granted independence, but they didn't receive as much land as they hoped for. Also, Albanian independence angered the Serbians, who had occupied their lands. So the Serbians, seeing they would achieve very little otherwise, withdrew from their previous agreements with the Bulgarians and continued to occupy southern Macedonia. So knowing how Bulgaria would react, Serbia signed a defensive alliance with the Greeks. Also, the Romanians feared the growing Bulgarian threat, so claimed the town of Silistria, and the great powers granted it to them. So now, facing encirclement and the loss of territory, Bulgaria invaded southern Serbia in June 1913. With the hopes of occupying as much land as they could before the great powers, particularly Russia, could interfere. Serbian victories prevented the Bulgarians from pushing further into Serbia, while the Greeks crossed into Bulgaria from the south. Then, on the 10th of July, the Romanians entered into the war, citing the concerns over Bulgaria's ambitions. They marched across the Danube and captured Varna, meeting very little resistance. This convinced the Ottomans, who hoped to reclaim their lost provinces, to enter the war as well. Now the Bulgarians were surrounded and the situation became untenable. They were driven out of Serbia, and then all four nations began pushing into Bulgaria. With Sofia threatened, the Bulgarians sued for peace. Romania took southern Dobruja, Greece expanded to the Nestos River, Serbia cemented its control over Vardar Macedonia, and the Ottomans retook Adrianople. The wars emboldened the Serbians, and this worried the Austrians. It also strained Austro-Russian relations, and the tensions would boil over when Gavrilo Princip shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. Beginning World War I. Plus, the wars also guaranteed that during the First World War, Bulgaria would join the Central Powers in the fight against Serbia and Russia.
Is there a test sound for this, William?
No, but World War I led to the fall of four great imperial dynasties in Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, resulted in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and its destabilization of European society laid the groundwork for World War II. So who exactly fought in World War I? Well, we had the Allied powers, which Romania and Moldova were a part of, but the main countries were the UK, the US, and Russia. And we also had the Central Powers, which Bulgaria was a member of, but Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans were the main part of this side. We can see that in total 6 empires fought in this war, and 4 of them, the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires, ended because of it. And 2 of them, the British Empire and the Japanese Empire, would end later on. The British Empire in 1997, and the Japanese officially in 1947. Canada, with 8 million citizens at the time, gave 650,000 troops. 65,000 of them died. Although we'll visit Germany, Austria, and Hungary later on in our journey, today we'll refer to their empires and how their dismantling created and redefined countries. We'll also refer to the Ottoman and Mongol empires that we've already visited on our journeys to Turkey and Mongolia. Now, just for some context, the Second Russian Revolution happened in 1917, where it resulted with the fall of the Romanovs and the beginning of Bolshevik communist rule. On November 11, 1918, World War I had officially ended with the signing of the armistice. And there were 5 important treaties after World War I with the Central Powers who got lost. They were between June 1919 and September 1920, and they involved Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Hungary, and the Ottomans. The treaties carved up the Austro-Hungarian, German, and Ottoman empires, creating 9 new nations: Czechoslovakia, Poland, Yugoslavia, Austria, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. So the first one was the Treaty of Versailles, which is perhaps the most famous one, and a lot of people think that it was the only one, but it was only one of 5. It was signed on June 28, 1919, and because of it, Germany lost 13% of its European territory and over 1/10 of its population. So here we have a map of what Germany lost exactly. So we can see that Poland, Poland, France, Belgium, Denmark, they all received substantial territory from Germany. And the Rhineland, which is the region between France and Germany, had to be demilitarized because France was afraid that Germany would launch a large invasion of them again. And they also lost all their colonies. So this could be in Africa or in Oceania. At this time, the League of Nations had also been created on January 10, 1920. It was actually included in the Treaty of Versailles. And Woodrow Wilson, who was the U.S. president at the time, was a strong advocate of it, as he believed that it would help to prevent future wars. And it was actually the first worldwide intergovernmental organization, kind of like the UN, has had its goal of maintaining world peace. And as it ended in 1946, many components of it were relocated into the UN. The USA did not sign the Treaty of Versailles, and the other ones that I will refer to, as a Republican-controlled Senate, rejected them. Rather, they signed subsequent similar treaties without reference to the League of Nations. So this was motivated by Republican concerns that the League would make the U.S. spend a ton of money on such an expensive organization. And this would reduce the U.S.'s ability to defend its own interests, because at the time, Republicans were increasingly nationalistic and isolationist post-World War I. And the second one was with Austria, called the Treaty of Saint-Germain, also called the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. It was signed on September 10, 1919. And Austria lost Bohemia and Moravia, which formed the core of Czechoslovakia, if we exclude Slovakia, and they also lost the large German-speaking population in Bohemia and the region of the Sudetenland, which is the reason why Germany invaded the region later on. Poland regained eastern Galicia, which in 1920 and 1921 they fought over with Ukraine, and Croat, Slovenian, and Bosnian territory was given to create part of Yugoslavia. The third one was with Bulgaria, called the Treaty of Neuilly, on November 27, 1919, where Bulgaria lost a lot of land and people. Greece received Western Thrace, and Romania regained the province of Dobruja. In total, Bulgaria lost over 250,000 people. The fourth one was with Hungary, called the Treaty of Trianon, on June 4, 1920. From this map, we can see that they faced substantial territorial loss. And in total, they lost 2/3 of their land and people. Czechoslovakia received Slovakia and other minor sites. And Romania received all of Transylvania, which was a lot for Hungary. And because of this, many Hungarian leaders believed that they should be entitled to this land back. The last one was with the Ottoman Empire on August 10, 1920, called the Treaty of Sèvres. It had an insane plan to make Turkey about a quarter of what it is today by giving regions such as Constantinople, now called Istanbul, to Greece. It also had a proposed plan for creating Kurdistan, and it also gave France and the UK large portions of territory. But it was not respected because the Turkish people believed that this was incredibly unfair for their country to lose most of its economic abilities, as most of these lands was where most of the money in the country came from. And because of this, there was the Turkish War of Independence, which resulted with the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, which created Turkey's modern-day borders. And just for some context, in 1922, the Soviet Union was formed. Now let's talk about World War II's impacts on Europe. So the war against the Nazis was among one of the most justified conflicts in history. Yet by the time of the Allied victory had become almost inevitable, it was clear that there were additional political goals, and for the Soviet Union, it was the domination and control of Eastern Europe, to serve as a potential buffer and to try to gain new allies. Now let's talk about some of the events prior to World War II. So, you may have heard about the region of the Sudetenland. Well, if you haven't, it's a province in northern Czechoslovakia bordering Germany. And the thing about it is that Adolf Hitler believed that the Sudetenland should be a part of Germany, as it had a large German-speaking population, as we said. And because of this, in 1938, he demanded Neville Chamberlain, who was the British PM at the time, to have Czechoslovakia ceded to him. And Neville was a very diplomatic guy, so he allowed it to happen. However, Czechoslovakia saw this as the UK betraying them, as it had a pact with Britain and France. And soon after, Germany invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia and annexed it, setting off tensions in Central Europe. However, Neville did not really think much of this, as he did not want to get involved in any faraway conflicts, specifically after World War I. Now let's talk about the start of World War II. So it began on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, and as they had a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, they helped invade Poland too, so they split it in half. And because of this, the Polish government and exile had to flee to London. On June 22nd, 1941, the Non-Aggression Pact was broken as Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. And because of this, the Soviets joined the Allies, which was one of the biggest errors that the Nazis would ever make. On September 2nd, 1945, World War II had officially ended. So this was when Japan surrendered after the U.S. launched the bomb on Nagasaki. However, on May 7th, which is my birthday, Germany had already surrendered. So this was the final straw for the Axis. In 1947, the Cold War had officially began with the creation of the Truman Doctrine and the domino theory, which said that even if one country fell to the communists, all other surrounding countries would too. Now, there were two main sides in the Cold War. It was NATO, which was created in 1949, and the Warsaw Pact, created in 1955, that ended in 1991. So it was created and supported by the Soviets. The border between the blue and red countries was called the Iron Curtain, which Winston Churchill often used. Now, the collapse of the Soviet Union. So one of the final straws for the Soviets was on June 4th, 1989, when the Solidarity Trade Union won the first free elections in Poland after the fall of communism. And this was a big stepping stone for other countries in the region, specifically Czechoslovakia, which followed this. Now, officially, the Soviet Union collapsed on December 26, 1991. And in 2005, Putin said one of his most memorable quotes. He said, "First and foremost, it is worth acknowledging that the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, which we can see by his invasions of Crimea, Georgia, and Ukraine, that he really means this, and he would like to recreate the Soviet Union." Now let's discuss Czechoslovakia, Romania, Moldova, and Bulgaria. So let's begin with a quick video about the history of Czechoslovakia, which will review certain ideas that we've already discussed.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is Europe, and here is the Czech Republic. Now let's check it out, shall we? The land which modern Czech borders encircle has been inhabited for a long, long time. What you're looking at is Devina Mountain, which is where this plus-size lady was unearthed, declared to be the oldest ceramic item in the world. A notable early culture on Czechian soil was the Uněžice, who were rather adept at metalworking. They made several stone and terracotta tablets which no one can read, and their purpose is unknown. Around 350 BC, the Celts began migrating into the land, specifically the tribe known as the Boii, who allied with Hannibal in his war against Rome. The Boii gave their name to Bohemia, the biggest chunk of Czechia. That bit is Moravia, named after the Morava River, and that's Czech Silesia. Anyway, after 9 BC, Germanic tribes began moving in and taking over. But during the disordered time of Western Rome's collapse, many Germans moved out and were replaced from the 6th century by Slavs from the east, who were attracted by the good soil, big forests, non-frozen rivers, and already established roads and trade routes in function. These Slavs were gradually absorbed into the population, who became known as Czechs. The Slavs, though good warriors, were not united here, and therefore were subjugated by invading Avars from Central Asia. They eventually did unite, however, in a rebellion in 623 under a Frankish-German leader called Samo, and the Avars were ousted. After Samo, disunity returned, and this time the Franks under Charlemagne invaded Czech lands in 805, subduing the inhabitants into paying tribute. Frankish and Irish missionaries spread Catholic Christianity, and Moravia began to grow as a power. Great Moravia reached its height under Spartapuk, after whose reign the state was torn by infighting and weakened by Hungarian invasion. Meanwhile, power was increasing next door in Bohemia under the Przemysl dynasty, one of whom was good King Wenceslas, who was the subject of a famous carol. He was murdered in a plot hatched by his own brother, and soon became venerated as a saint. His brother's conquests included conquering Moravia, and in 1002, the Duchy of Bohemia joined the Germanic Holy Roman Empire, becoming a kingdom in 1198 under Ottokar I. Germans began moving in, and the country strengthened, and the Mongols failed to conquer it in in 1241. A lot of this strength was due to the reign of Ottokar II, called the Iron and Golden King. He enriched and expanded the kingdom, beat the Hungarians, crusaded against Prussian pagans, built towns and fortresses like this, and while he dreamed of becoming Holy Roman Emperor, he died in battle in 1278. While the House of Luxembourg took control in 1310, the 14th century would see Czech history sail into a golden age with Charles IV, who claimed ancient Czech blood on his mother's side. He became Holy Roman Emperor, and Prague became the imperial capital, which he adorned with churches, castles, bridges, and universities. Indeed, Charles played no small part in making Prague what it still is, a top contender for the most beautiful city in the world. The Black Death, which ravaged so much of Europe, found its odious scythe a little blunted in Bohemia, but about 10 to 15% of Czech people died from it. Several seeds of Protestantism sprouted in Czech lands, with the theologian Jan Hus, who, angered at the corruption in the church and inspired by John Wycliffe's ideas, such as having the language of the people used in services as opposed to Latin, began preaching against the shortcomings of Catholicism. Hus believed the Bible was more important for salvation than church rituals, and amassed a large following of Hussites. Hus was eventually captured and burned at the stake, but it didn't end there. The Hussites ignited a revolution that saw peasants and farmers fashioned into a lethal and effective fighting force under men like Jan Žižka, an intelligent, innovative tactician who ranks among the greatest generals in history. The Hussites defeated 5 crusades launched against them, and the Pope finally decided on diplomacy, and the frenzy died down and reforms made. But war weakened the land, and just under a century later, in 1526, the Catholic Habsburg Austrians took over. The Czechs were not happy about it, and this unhappiness materialized in 1618, when some Protestant nobles, angered at Catholics closing Protestant churches, marched into Prague Castle and threw 2 officials and a secretary out the window. They landed in a mound of manure in the moat below, but this act helped spark the ruinous 30 Years' War. The Protestant Czechs were crushed by the Catholic Austrians, and in 1627 it was decreed that Protestant nobles had to either accept Catholicism or get out. About 20% got out, and thus Catholics regained Czechia. The years following saw German culture triumph over Czech. Plague, revolts, Prussian invasion, famine, and more war. Napoleon's famous victory at Austerlitz took place in Czech lands, not far from Brno. Napoleon effectively ended the Holy Roman Empire, and Bohemia became part of Austria. The 19th century saw the reawakening of the Czech national spirit, with Czech writers and composers drawing inspiration from Czech history and culture in their hopes to inflame a move towards independence. Listen to this excerpt of the Dvořák and tell me you can't hear the zeal. Austria was slipping, losing a war against Prussia and losing the First World War. The Austrian Empire collapsed, and the Czechs joined their brethren in Slovakia in forming independent Czechoslovakia, with Tomáš Masaryk as first president. Czechoslovakia soon became an industrial powerhouse, but then the Nazis invaded and took over, with the aim of Germanifying it all. Thousands of Czechs were killed, and the Czech Jews pretty much annihilated. And while the Nazis were defeated at the end of World War II, they were replaced by the communist Soviets, and Czechoslovakia became part of the Eastern Bloc, that shivering shelf of satellite states pretty much under Soviet rule. Now, there were a lot of Germans in Czech lands, but they were kicked out, and times were bad, and there wasn't much freedom, and by 1968 the people had had enough and protested en masse in the Prague Spring, encouraged by the reforms of Dubček. Then the Soviets sent in tanks and 500,000 troops to brutally quash the revolt in an invasion that made even the most hardened left-wing Western intellectuals squirm. The years passed, and the older generation of dissidents joined the younger in the peaceful 1989 Velvet Revolution, which saw the collapse of communism and parliamentary democracy restored, and the separation of the Czech Republic and Slovakia, with the beloved writer Václav Havel as Czech president. Economic reforms lifted the Czech Republic into prosperity. It joined NATO in 1999 and the EU in 2004. And while politics has been a little tempestuous, the Czech Republic has rapidly achieved a very high Human Development Index, a safe and peaceful land whose picturesque market squares and green fields and jovial beer festivals give little indication of the great suffering this land has endured. A land that has produced immense richness in literature, in music, in sport, in art, in science, in cinema. A land that welcomes more than 20 million tourists a year. That's the Czech Republic, and that's all from me for now. Bye-bye!
Now we begin our section about Romania with this very quick video to start off. Then we'll have a bunch of slides explaining the rest of the history.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is Europe, and here's Romania, Now let's go, shall we? The stunningly scenic land of Romania has been inhabited for a very long time. During the Neolithic age, peaceful, classless communities farmed the good, rich earth with tools made from stone and antlers. Hugging the Black Sea coast in the east was another archaic culture with a pretty chill, laid-back kind of art. Centuries later, we hear tell of a Thracian tribe in the south called the Geti, whom the Greek historian Herodotus referred to as the bravest and most upright of all the Thracians. To the west arose a related group, some consider the same, others different, called the Dacians, fierce warriors who fought with a weapon called the falx, the largest variety of which was a two-handed polearm with a big menacing blade of curved iron. In the 1st century BC, the Dacian tribes were united under Burebista, who conquered a number of peoples and collided, in so doing, with the Romans, making an enemy of none other than Julius Caesar in the process. Caesar was planning to invade Dacia, but instead found himself invaded by a number of daggers when he was assassinated. Dacia's next big thing was Decebalus, who defeated a Roman army during the reign of Domitian. But when Emperor Trajan ascended the throne, things changed. Rome's armies returned and defeated the Dacians in 2 successive battles. Rather than face capture and shame, Decebalus killed himself. The Romans chopped his head off and took it back to their capital as a trophy. Thus Dacia was added to the Roman Empire, and the region was Romanized, and Rome's language, Latin, is the parent of modern Romanian. Now, Dacia was located in a tricky spot and was highly susceptible to troublesome invaders. So Emperor Aurelian made the decision in the year 271 to withdraw Rome's forces stationed there. In the dark, messy, swirling centuries that followed, the land was invaded by a myriad of peoples: Goths and Gepids and Huns and Magyars and Avars and Bulgars and Slavs. Now, amidst all this confusion, let's take a quick look at the modern borders of Romania. The 3 main historical sections of the country were Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. And so...
What about Dobruja?
Yes, Dobruja, you're important too.
Dobruja.
Anyway, these borders were far from being concrete in medieval times, when other nations were all too eager to gobble up more ground. The Hungarians, for instance, had a very firm foot in Transylvania. But Hungarian lordship over Wallachia ended with Wallachia Sada in the year 1330 under Basarab I. Around 30 years later, Bogdan I managed to do the same thing for Moldavia, and proximity to Bulgarians and Byzantines encouraged the spread of Orthodox Christianity, which remains the dominant faith of Romania today. And speaking of dominating, the Ottoman Turks were very big on that sort of thing, as they conquered out an empire, including chunks of Eastern Europe. And while the Ottomans were no strangers to cruelty, even they were shocked at the brutality of this man here, Wallachia's Vlad III, also known as Dracula, son of the dragon, whose most grandiose act of barbarism was having over 20,000 Turks impaled on sharpened wooden stakes, hence the nickname Vlad the Impaler. So while he wasn't a vampire like the fictional Count Dracula concocted by Bram Stoker in his famous 1897 novel, the real Dracula was far more bloodthirsty a figure. This was also the time of Stephen the Great of Moldavia, a superb military leader, tireless builder, and strong, effective ruler who oversaw a time of stability and growth. Skipping ahead to the late 1500s, the Habsburg monarchy began challenging the Ottoman presence in Romanian lands, and in the year 1600, Wallachian Prince Michael the Brave, and he'd have to be brave walking around in a hat like that, united Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania, thus uniting the Romanian princedoms for the first time. It didn't last long, but it would inspire future nationalists in realizing that unity again. European powers succeeded in weakening the Ottoman position in Europe, but Turkish control remained in Moldavia and Wallachia. As for Transylvania, it came under Habsburg-Hungarian control. In the following century, the Habsburgs pinched a portion of Moldavia, and in 1812 the Russians took the eastern section of Moldavia, called Bessarabia. The modern nation of Moldova was formed from that bit. Now, after the Russians defeated the Turks in this war, Russian influence was added to that of the Ottomans in Wallachia and Moldavia. Those regions did not like this influence, and in 1848 rose up in revolution against them. They were crushed. However, in 1859, under Prince Alexandru, Wallachia and Moldavia joined together and became known as Romania. But it wasn't until the reign of his successor, Carol I, that Romania gained its independence after fighting on the side of Russia in the Russo-Turkish War. Romania also gained northern Dobruja after that same conflict. Carol ushered Romania into the 20th century and beautified the capital, Bucharest. In 1917, as Russia collapsed in revolution, Bessarabia rejoined Romania, and that bit the Habsburgs had pinched was returned, and not long afterwards, Transylvania rejoined Romania, but this enlarged Romania did not Romania though. In the deathly midst of World War II, it lost quite a lot of land, including Bessarabia to the USSR. This agitated era fostered the rise of Ion Antonescu. As Prime Minister, he allied with Adolf Hitler and began attacking and deporting Roma people and Jews, many thousands of whom were killed. After the war, he was put on trial for war crimes and executed. As communism took root in Romania, the king was pressured to abdicate and Stalinist policies were implemented. Under the leadership of Nicolae Ceausescu, Romania's post-Stalin breaths of relief were stifled after 1971 when he became more and more Stalinesque in his totalitarian methods of governance. His handling of economics was disastrously flawed and the people suffered horribly. But this didn't stop him from ordering a magnificent, massive, monumental palace to be built for himself. Of course, there's only so much misery the people can shoulder and endure, and in 1989 they rose up in a revolution. Ceausescu was overthrown, and he and his wife Elena were shot dead by a firing squad. Romania's economy grew well in the 2000s, and it joined NATO and it joined the EU, and despite some lingering problems, the country today has achieved a very high level of human development and the status of a high-income economy. And let's hope the improvements accumulate for this country that has given us such greatness in science, sports, the arts, and food deliciousness. So that's it for Romania, and that's all from me for now. Bye-bye!
Now, so just a little bit of a review about what it talks about and some new concepts. So Carol I was the one who united Romania and made it an independent state. And in World War I, although he wanted to be on the side of the Central Powers, he accepted neutrality. Ferdinand I came after him, and although he was a believer in German strength, he joined the Allies in World War I, which was a good choice because it allowed him to gain Bessarabia, Bukovina, and Transylvania. Michael I came after him, but his first period of rule was not that significant. But a fun fact about him is that he was related to Queen Elizabeth II, as he was a great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria. Now, Carol II came after him, so he was infamous for his affair with Helena Lupescu, which made him leave the country. So in 1930, when he was allowed to return, instead of being a nice guy, he decides to dethrone his son, Michael. And in 1938, he established a dictatorship and cultivated closer ties with the Axis countries. But good for Romania, Michael I came back, and he deposed Carol II. And in 1944, he also deposed Ion Antonescu, Romania's fascist military leader, and he joined the Allies. But in 1945, he was forced to allow the creation of a communist government, and in 1947, he was pressured to leave the country. During World War II, the Soviets controlled Romania, and Romania was forced to cede the lands that are now Moldova to the USSR. In 1958, a communist government was installed, led by Petru Groza. Many leaders came after him, but the last one, Nicolae Ceausescu, was the most infamous. So once Chief Stoica resigned, Nicolae Ceausescu began his reign in 1974, and he was known for his very dictatorial rule, his lack of successful economic plan, and his total disregard for the state of his country. He began the construction of the Romanian parliament, which is still the heaviest building in the world. In fact, it weighs over 4 million tons, it's 84 meters tall, and it has 4 million square feet of space. It was designed by a team of over 700 architects. Now, he was deposed in 1989, and he and his wife were shot to death by a firing squad. Capitalism took over with the rule of Ion Iliescu, who transitioned the country into a free market economy. Now let's talk about Romania's beautiful geography. So here we have some very nice pictures of its landscape. So no wonder millions of people want to visit every year. We also have some of the famous chateaus in Romania, specifically in the castle in the castle region of Transylvania. We also have the capital of Bucharest, which is often called Paris of the East, just because of how much it looks like the City of Lights. We have the Arc de Triomphe in Bucharest that was modeled after the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. We have some very nice pictures of Transylvania with its very hilly and mountainous landscape. And we have two remarkable Romanians, Nadia Comaneci, who is a well-known gymnast and who received the first tennis award ever at the Montreal Olympics, and Henelian Nastasi, who's one of the world's best tennis players, and he's won 7 Grand Slam titles. Now let's talk about Bulgaria, firstly with this short video.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is Europe, and here is Bulgaria. Now let's go, shall we? What's now Bulgaria has been inhabited for eons. The Copper Age Varna culture was a society of expert artisans, skilled metalworkers, who may have been the first goldsmiths in history. What you're looking at is a dead guy with more money than me. Now, around the end of the Bronze Age, the Thracians swept into the land, themselves skilled gold and silversmiths, masterful horsemen and musicians. Perpetually bickering and never unified, the Thracians were conquered and under Persian rule till the Greeks pushed the Persians out of Europe. With King Teres, the Thracians finally united into the Odrysian kingdom. Here's a sample of their artistic powers. But after a century or so, it began to fracture and was no match for Macedon. When the Roman Republic began encroaching into Thrace and enslaving folks, one captive Thracian became the famous Spartacus, a tactician of genius who led a lethal slave revolt against Rome, until being finally crushed by the legions of the ruthless Marcus Licinius Crassus, who had all 6,000 surviving rebels crucified. Thrace ultimately became part of the Roman Empire, and there was peace. After Western Rome fell, Thrace became part of Eastern Rome, or Byzantium, and Slavs started invading and settling in the 5th and 6th centuries. But Bulgaria gets its name from a Turkic tribe, the Bulgars, who invaded in the 7th century under Khan Asparuch and ruled over the Slavs as a military elite. Over time, however, they adopted the language of the Slavic majority. Anyhow, the First Bulgarian Empire was established, and war with Byzantium was commonplace. Though the Byzantines were often victorious, the Bulgars did inflict crushing defeats. When Khan Krum beat a Byzantine army, he made the skull of Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus I into a drinking cup. What a crummy thing to do. The disparate peoples of Bulgaria were eventually unified by Christianity, which was officially adopted in 864 by Boris I. Bulgaria's peak in power, prestige, and culture occurred during the reign of Simeon the Great, who conquered land and beautified his capital at Preslav, where the Cyrillic alphabet was born. But Byzantium had only ever begrudgingly accepted Bulgaria and yearned to reconquer its Balkan territories. This yearning materialized with Emperor Basil II, called the Bulgar Slayer, whose merciless campaign ended the Bulgarian Empire. How merciless? After the Battle of Kledion, he had 99% of the enemy captives blinded, leaving the ones with sight to lead their unfortunate comrades back to their leader in shame. Bristling beneath the Byzantine boot, Bulgarians began rebelling. Finally, they regained freedom, and the Bulgarian Empire Part II began, with its capital at Veliko Drumovo, attaining its height under Ivan Asen II. Clashing continued concerning Constantinople and Crusaders, and everyone in this area was weakening themselves, warring with each other and warding off Mongols, meaning they were not strong enough to stop the Turkish tide. Ottoman rule lasted almost 500 years, with the proud Bulgarians reduced to humiliating subjugation. There were several uprisings over the centuries, but they were viciously squashed. But by the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was a weazened, withered wisp of what it once was. Russia saw itself as the protector of its Orthodox Christian brothers brooding in their chains, and did all it could to free them, which was a lot. The Russo-Turkish War followed the international outrage at Ottoman atrocities against Bulgarians, where tens of thousands were slaughtered by Bashevazuk soldiers. Russia and its Bulgarian Gopalchensi allies beat the Turks in battles like Shipka Pass, and Bulgaria was free once again. Some years later, Serbia grew uneasy at Bulgaria looking like it would be a potential boss of the Balkans, and started a war. But Bulgaria beat them. The magnificent Alexander Nevsky Cathedral was constructed in the capital Sofia, as modernization was adopted alongside militarism. And in the First Balkan War, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro jointly attacked the remaining Ottoman possessions in Europe, getting more land. But when Bulgaria did not get its promised Macedonian territories, it declared war on its former allies, and ended up deprived of land it had gained in the previous war. More misery resulted from Bulgaria joining the losing side in both world wars, leaving hundreds of thousands of Bulgarian casualties, and the country ruined and run by communist dictators. Todor Zhivkov led Bulgaria for 35 years, and did the most James Bond villain thing you'll hear all day. He had a secret agent assassinate the dissident writer Georgi Markov in London with a poisoned pellet fired into his leg from an umbrella. Democracy returned in 1990 and great improvements have been made since, though corruption remains a concern. Bulgaria, which has given us a lot of science, literature, art and sporting excellence, joined the EU in 2007, and while problems remain, it has attained a very high Human Development Index, and millions of tourists visit every year, soaking up the sights or the sun in its scenic Black Sea resorts. So good luck to Bulgaria, but as for me, it's bye for now. Bye-bye!
Rob Armstrong asks, please tell us about the countries in terms of size of their economies, populations, and geography. So here we have a snapshot of all 5 countries. We can see that Romania has the largest land area, population, and GDP. But Czechia, which is one of the most developed countries in the world, has the highest GDP per capita. Czechia's capital is Prague, Slovakia's is Bratislava, Romania's is Bucharest, Moldova's is Chisinau, and Bulgaria's is Sofia. Rob Armstrong asks, please tell some fun facts. So, firstly, in Romania, after a wedding, wives are often kidnapped for good luck. Some of the best Greek yogurt is actually from Bulgaria. Regional Moldova has a whole day dedicated to wine, and it has the largest wine parade in the world because it has 3 wine-producing regions. And Czechia has the most alcoholics per capita, with 1 in 7 Czech adults being an alcoholic. And a less fun fact is that recently the Prime Minister of Slovakia, which is who's a big Putin ally, was shot multiple times and he was in the hospital, but he's a lot better now. And finally, how do you say butterfly? In Czech and Slovak, it's motil. In Romanian, it's flutur. And Moldova also speaks Romanian. And in Bulgarian, it's peperuda. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Are there any questions? Are there any questions?
You covered a lot of territory,
It sure
Yes.
is.
a lot of history.
Yes.
It was very good though.
Thank you.